Hey everyone, it's Kacey Kasem here, bringing you a brand new episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem. It's the podcast that talks to various people in the fantasy football industry to get sort of a behind-the-scenes look at their lives and the industry itself. This week's guest is Joe Pisapia. You may know Joe from his Fantasy Black Book series. The 2021 edition just came out for fantasy football and is available on Amazon. You could also know him as a podcast host and video host with Fantasy Pros. He's also everywhere, so you're bound to know who he is. And if you don't, never fear. We talk about tons of stuff in this episode, including acting, being a podcast host, Team Android, the process of putting together something like the Fantasy Black Book series, and a lot more. You can also find Joe on Twitter at JoePisapia17. You can find me on Twitter at @TheKaceyKasem. You can find the podcast on Twitter at GetReal_pod. My writing can be found with the Fantasy Footballers at thefantasyfootballers.com. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. Go check out all of those podcasts as well. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It's because of people like you that this podcast continues to grow. If you're enjoying this podcast, donate $1 or $2 a month to help the pod continue to grow. You can also find the Get Real Patreon at patreon.com/Kacey Kasem. Thanks again. And here's my conversation with Joe Pisapia.
You're in charge. I will follow wherever you need.
Thank you. I like being in charge, so this is great. That's why I have my own podcast.
It's nice for a change to not be in charge.
There you go.
We're walking hand in hand today. This is good.
Great. Okay, well, Joe, for everybody that may not know exactly who you are or anything like that, we'll get to that in a minute. We'll start with the beginning time, back in the day when you were a little tyke. When you were growing up, were you a sports fan? Did you like sports? Did you play sports?
I did. It was, I came from a family that was really into sports. And growing up in New York, I grew up in Brooklyn, and it was in the 80s. And, baseball in New York is just king. And I came from a baseball family, and I played baseball most of my life. And that was always like the first passion, the first love. It was only, I would say, in the last decade or so that football kind of overtook that for me. But yeah, I was always a sports guy. It's funny because my parents were sports fans, but not like crazy diehard. However, all the peripheral like grandparents and other people and cousins all were, and that just kind of seeped in for me. So sports was always something, and I always played something every season too. And I don't know, I always enjoyed not just the competitiveness, but the craft of it too. Like I was somebody that I liked practice. Like some kids are like, I don't want to go to practice. Well, I did. I liked the batting cage. I liked all that stuff. I like to be able to do those things. And and my first job was coaching baseball. Actually, I got paid at 17 years old to coach baseball in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Best first job ever. So like sports was always a big thing. Sports and like theater and movies and things like that. Those were the two like big family passions. And it's funny because I went to school for acting because I got more money to go to school for acting than I did to go play baseball. So I said, well, I could do that forever. I'm only 5'7". I'm not going to play in the major leagues. I ain't that good. But yeah, and it's funny because now I talk about sports all day and I kind of play myself, which is kind of fun after being in all those different businesses all those years. So yeah, sports was always a very important part of my life. And I'm very lucky to be able to work in it. I know it's very difficult for people to do, but I'm very grateful for that opportunity that I've had.
So when you were growing up, did you want to be a baseball player when you grew up? Or what? Yeah, that was the top choice.
The Mets in the 80s, I mean, come on, like the Keith Hernandez and Dwight Gooden and all. I mean, and that's the thing, too. Like, growing up then, that was the team. Like, the Yankees were kind of like in the background, which has not been the rest of my life. My childhood set me up for failure for the rest of my life in terms of baseball. So, yeah, that was definitely the case. And actually, one of the biggest arguments I ever had with my parents was I wanted to play football freshman year of high school. I said, look, I love this coach. I want to go play football. I love football. I want to give it a shot. And biggest fight I ever had because they didn't want me to get hurt for baseball. That was it. Like, you get money for baseball, you'll get hurt for baseball. It was a big week-long thing. But yeah, it was, like I said, it's crazy how life kind of takes its twists and turns on you, those kind of things. But it's been fun. It's been a wild ride, that's for sure.
So when did you start playing? Well, the first question is, did you play fantasy baseball first, or was fantasy football the first taste?
I actually started playing fantasy baseball first, and then the next year started playing fantasy football. So it was like 99 into 2000. So that's how far back I go. It's 20 plus years. I've got 2 decades now. But yeah, it's and fantasy football at the time was not quite second, but very even. It's only been in the last 20 years or so where it's just rocketed past, where football is king, and it's because it's more casual, it's more digestible. There's far less players, it's a lot less work. You're able to have a schedule of when you do your things. The games are mostly on Sunday, and then you go from there and kind of start your week. Whereas baseball has been a real grind, and baseball's kind of changed. And the game is not the same game that I grew up with. It's still good. It's just, and I still cover baseball for Fantasy Pros, still for the Black Book too. And it's just not quite the same game, whereas football, I think, has evolved tremendously into a better product. I think what you've seen with football, where they've really protected the quarterbacks, they're starting to protect the players better, more responsibly. They're also just, the wide open offenses, the evolution of the quarterback position to the more mobile quarterbacks. What you're seeing here is this high-end athleticism. It's a faster game, and it's a fun game, and I think that it's a more digestible game, even for the casual fan. So fantasy football for me was actually second, a close one, but then, like I said, in the last 10 years, that's obviously evolved quite a bit. But the fantasy football game, too, has evolved, too, which is great because I'm a big Superflex guy. I've been writing about it for years in the Black Book, trying to push people to it.
Yeah.
Because Casey, it drives me nuts. Like, we're sitting around fighting over 98-point running backs. Who the hell cares? And meanwhile, this 200-point quarterback sitting on the waiver wire drives me absolutely out of my mind. And it's so great to see that in the last couple of years, that's starting to take hold a little bit. These dynasty leagues are mostly super flex, and that's great. Like, that's kind of becoming the new standard, which is terrific. So I think they've done a really good job of the game's evolved better as well, whereas some people are still stuck in the old ways of baseball and roto, and it's not as interesting, and it's, you got to evolve. You want fantasy to mirror the game itself.
You do. And with fantasy baseball, how did you find out about it in the first place? Like, how did you stumble across that?
Well, a friend of mine in college, and it's funny because even though I went to art school, the irony is it happened to be with a bunch of people who also, happened to be big into sports. It was very weird. Like, we used to watch, Raw every Monday night. We go to my friend John's house and we watch wrestling every Monday, and I still do with my kids. Like, it's kind of a weird group. You wouldn't think like, oh, well, the acting students would all go and, hang out at the Phillies game. But we did, and a buddy of mine was like, hey, let's do a fantasy league, and I think it was like 98 or something like that where we started. And it just, I saw the board in a certain way, and I saw, I was like, well, there's kind of values here, and we were doing it with like pencils and paper, like this is how old school, right?
Yeah.
Where you're trying to figure out, like, hey, what are the stats, and how does this work, and the early stat services on the internet. I mean, people don't understand how good you got it right now, okay? Right. It is fantastic. But it was a real challenge then, but I liked the challenge, and I liked the craft of it. And it's funny because what I noticed right away is understanding, well, the scarcity of positions, and then that basically evolved over the years into relative position value, which is the core of the Black Book series, which is funny because I was kind of doing it instinctually, and then I kind of saw it in a different way, and then it developed, and I was having a lot of success, and then just like the passion took over it, and I started writing for a couple sites, and then keep spurring one thing into another. But yeah, like that's kind of the story of where it started, basically, which is kind of crazy when you think about what we have now, where we could draft on our phone. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, every time I hear the stories like that, I'm like, we do have it so easy now.
Oh, so easy,
so easy.
Casey, so easy. You got mock draft wizards. You got, I mean, you have to sit around. I mean, you would sit around and like try to like with a pen and paper and mock out what you thought the draft was I know this person's got this tendency. Maybe they'll do this. You're trying to guess, basically. I mean, what we have now is amazing, which makes it harder too, because everybody's, more well-informed. So it's a greater challenge to separate yourself nowadays. Everything is spoon-fed to you in terms of like data, in terms of analysis. So it's really like if you suck now, you got to like work really hard to suck, but you got to work even harder, I think, to be really good. And I think that's kind of where it's separated now in the football community.
Yeah, I can see that. Did the fantasy football come off of fantasy baseball, or how did you start playing fantasy
It did.
football?
That same group. We, of course, baseball was fun, so let's do football. Yeah. And then it kind of spurned into that. And that was, like I said, back in 2000, right? So you're talking about like a different crop. It's like the old Adrian Peterson days and, guys like that where, the Marshall, actually it's more like Marshall Faulk and Edgerrin James and that group of running backs. Those guys are in the Hall of Fame now. but yeah, that was kind of the beginning right around there of the greatest show on turf. And offense is starting to emerge. And you saw Kurt Warner take that team to the Super Bowl. And that's where you started to see kind of that old guard. It started to change a little bit. And then eventually we got to the place we are now. But I think people forget at that time how kind of revolutionary that Rams offense was with the 3 wide receivers they would run out there, and Marshall Faulk and Kurt Warner, and the amount of scoring and the amount of shots that they took downfield. You didn't see that as much. It was a more conservative game, less so than it was in the 80s. But even towards like the mid 90s, it was still, run the football, play defense. This is how you win. And I think it was that team that kind of, sort of, especially from a fantasy point, where you go, oh, okay. And then later, a few years later, you get LaDainian Tomlinson, and you get some other fun offenses, and all of a sudden, we saw the evolution, as it were, of that running back position, and now to see what we've got with the wide receivers and the quarterbacks, which is really what the game is set up for now. So it's very cool. It's cool to have lived through the incarnations, from the you must have RBs to understanding. Well, you gotta have the right RBs, and if you don't, there's other ways you can make it work.
Yeah, I love to see that change. Even like, I haven't played as long, but the
no
amount
one
of time,
has, except like Bob Harris,
right?
Except my buddy Bob. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah, there you go. Exactly. You guys have lived through a lot. But but like, I've still seen enough over the last few years to say, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, because like just the super flex that you've been pushing, and just to see that emergence has been really dope. So when did you decide to get involved with the fantasy industry? How did you decide that that's something you wanted to go down?
It's the funny part about it is it wasn't a real conscious choice. It was something I was super passionate and obsessed with. And I think that's where everybody starts with it. Like, you're obsessed with it. And I had worked for a long time. I'd worked for more than a decade as an actor, and had a lot of success and worked. It wasn't like, waiting for Guffman community theater kind of acting, like real acting,
Right
like, we got there like theater and off-Broadway shows and touring things and stuff like that. And I was kind of burnt out, and I was working a real job and directing something at the time. I kind of took a job working in a hotel system in Hilton hotels for a while, and I was very good at it, but I didn't care for it, but it was making a lot of money. And, you go through different stages of life, but my little like side passion was I would write at my desk for a website. I would write fantasy article once a week, like a little baseball article and then a little football article. And then and that was for free. I wasn't making any money. I just liked to do it. And then I realized how much time I was kind of spending on it. And then I started working for, I was like, well, I should get paid if I'm spending time on it, right?
Right.
And then I worked for another place that offered me XYZ, did it for a year. They completely stiffed me. And I said, well, this is dumb. I'm not working for anybody else but me now. And that's when I wrote the first Black Book. And that was now 11 years ago. And I just put it out there thinking, okay, I'm going to put this out there. Maybe it'll sell 50 copies. I've got some good ideas. And there was really nothing in the space at the time, especially like for Kindle. And that's basically what Amazon was at the time. And it went to like #1 in the genre, first shot out of the gate. And I was like, whoa, look at this. And people said, oh, this is great. You can do one next year. And I said, well, I guess I am. And that just kind of where it spurned. And a friend of mine from high school who I was in fantasy leagues with, who was also a broadcaster, was at the time co-hosting a show on Sirius XM Fantasy, and would have me come on and do a standing bit every Saturday night. And then that show went under, and they offered it to me. And I said, well, I'll do it, but only if my buddy Dan does it with me. So we then started doing that show together, and we had the worst slot ever. 10 p.m. Eastern to 1 a.m. in the morning, Saturday night. Nobody's calling us. We're talking about fantasy sports. And it just kind of spurred from there. And it was like a show, and it was fun. And, we were working with your friends, and it just literally snowballed from the books into the radio, into the podcast. And we had been doing a podcast on the side, and we again, it was a lot harder to do podcasts. He had to like steal stuff from like his work, kind of thing, like borrow, quote unquote, for a weekend so we could like do a podcast, and then he would bring it back on Monday. That's what we would have to do, because you would need all the real equipment. Nobody just had like all these mics and things like that. It wasn't the case. And it just kind of, spurred from there into eventually working for Sirius for a few years and working for FanDuel and a bunch of other sites, and then Fantasy Network, which became Sports Grid TV, which I still work at, and then this new opportunity of Fantasy Pros this year, which has been fantastic. And it's been like, I never set out to do anything except just do good work and try my best to like bring good information and do it in an entertaining way, because it's kind of difficult. Some people are kind of dull, when they talk about fantasy. Numbers are good, numbers are important, but like if you're not engaging the audience, it's hard to get them to come back, because they can get a good information anywhere, like I said before. So you got to give them a little information plus. And I think that's been the challenge. And I've worked so many places, and like I've worked so more places than people have applied in their lifetime, and it's just to get the experience of doing. And I think that's, I've been very grateful and lucky for that, and I think it's really paid off in the end.
So, do you think that the acting background has helped you with,
Absolutely.
being in front of the camera, talking into the
100%.
microphone? Yeah.
I had a distinct advantage there because I was comfortable with it, and comfortable with listening and comfortable with working off people and stuff that, all the training sets you up for, So I think that had a lot to do with it. But even so, it's not always peaches and cream. It's not, that you get paired with people sometimes where you don't have natural chemistry. You got to find it. Sometimes you get paired with people and from the instant you're working with them, it's going to be great. And the instant you're working with somebody, this is going to be a challenge. And your job is to make it somehow work. And that's difficult. It's a lot harder than people realize sometimes.
So putting out the first podcast when you didn't have all the stuff that we have now, us lucky people, what was the one thing that was like the most, like, I don't want to do it, this is horrible, but I have to? What was that kind of thing?
It wasn't, nothing was horrible. Again, I think it was this labor of love. We both hated our regular jobs, and we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we could just do this? I think that's what it was. And I think that's like, it's like everybody else who's doing a podcast and comes home from their day job and does that. It's like, this is fun. This is the joy. Okay, how do I turn the joy into money? Like, how do I support myself eventually? And it takes a long time, especially in an industry like this, which is funny because it's eerily similar to the acting world because a lot of people want to get in it. Everybody thinks they're really good at it, even though they're not. And then on top of which, most places will take advantage of you and not pay you what they should because everybody wants to be in it. So they can get a lot of cheap free labor that's good, not great, and they can get by. And that's an unfortunate set of circumstances, but there's a real parallel there.
I like that. Yeah, I've never even thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense. It does. So when you decided to put the book out, that was something that hadn't been done before, like you said, really. And there's nothing out there. You didn't see that kind of stuff. What made you decide that was the platform you wanted to go down?
Well, again, I controlled it, and I saw growth every year. And the first one was baseball, and then we expanded into football. And, this is now 17 books later in 10 years, 11 years, right? We're just hammering them out. And I used to do them all by myself. I mean, when I started. So I would be doing, like, for baseball, for instance, 450 player profiles. For football, 300 profiles. And I said to myself, this is crazy. Especially as it started to grow, I said, I need more help. So I brought in, key people and said, okay, come, you write this section, I'll write this section, I'll pay you this. And I always wanted to make sure everybody was getting compensated for their work, which is, again, something that's difficult sometimes in this industry to do because I knew what it was like to not be compensated. It sucks. So that's what it was. And it was like, you know what, I can control this. This is my brand no matter what. No matter where I'm working that decides they're going to get rid of content tomorrow, and they do sometimes. Yeah. You end up having that to go back to all the time. And it wasn't until Amazon, I think, got to the place where they started you could have physical copies of the books now. In the last few years, that's when it really just kind of exploded into something else. And then it's crazy. It's one thing to be number one in fantasy sports. It's another thing when you're number one in football books in August. Like, that's nuts. Like, when you see, like, Joe Namath's book and your book, you're like, well, I live in an alternate dimension. This is insane. And it's great. And I think it's because people have success with it. It's easily digestible. It covers all their leagues. It really talks about strategy. And it's more about preparing you for all of your leagues and understanding how to really do it as opposed to just a lot of opinions about players and stuff. Because, like, rankings are great and tiers are great, but I'm all about quantifying it. And that's what relative position value does in the book. And that's what the system does. And it's not like too much where it's overbearing. So, like, the casual fan can pick it up, but it works also for the diehard crazy lunatic football player, which is good. That's what you want to cover everybody,
Right. And a lot of people don't put that thought process into it when they're putting out work, right? So it's either geared towards somebody that's going to understand everything that you're writing.
It's very generic for the most part, and it's well informed, but kind of generic. And we have standalone chapters like, here's Superflex for 2021, here's Best Ball, here's Auction, here's PPR, because chances are nowadays people are playing more than one league, different formats, and talking about like how do you build core roster strength? How do you approach the player pool this year? Because every year the player pool changes. When like quarterbacks are starting to, like the top tier quarterback is separating itself in the last few years. In the single quarterback league, the old, well, you could wait and get a quarterback. Yeah, you can, but you're going to be behind.
Yeah.
Like, you got to understand that this is a different game now. And I wrote a big manifesto about it last year in the quarterback section. And it again came to fruition this past year with Josh Allen, with Kyler Murray, right? Like, it is different now. So that notion is like, well, I can wait. Yeah, you can. But that elite tier is separating itself. And I can show it to you in the cold hard numbers, right in a percentage, so you can see it in for your face and you go, oh, yes, I see. Now I know why it's worth maybe looking at them a little bit earlier than I used to.
Why do you think that the physical copy of the book does so well?
For me personally, like, I like books.
Yeah, right.
Like, I don't know about you, like, if somebody, I don't like to like read something on a tablet. Maybe it's because I look at screens all day for the shows and stuff. That could be it too. But I like the smell of a book. I like the holding of a book. And it's not a magazine, right? Because it's different than that. It's literally a book. So the pages you can take notes on, you can highlight stuff. Like, it's durable, so people take it with them on vacation. It's like, so you can pack it in the suitcase and it holds up. It doesn't get all torn apart. I think there's something about it where they feel like kind of empowered. And then it's great because you can go back and you can reference, like, oh, I got just a single quarterback PPR draft tomorrow. I'm going to go look a couple things and check it out. And I think it's something about that, although we're a digital age and, a lot of people buy the Kindle, some people buy both, which is hilarious to me. I don't know why they do it, but they do, because, and I say, why do you do it? It's like, well, I like to have access to it, at all times, but like at the same time, I like the book.
Yeah.
So, people have their habits, and I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for all their habits.
I like the physical copy as well. I like having that object that I can hold on to. I like being able to flip the pages, the smell of the book, feeling the pages. So yeah, I totally get that. How much bigger is the book now than it was when it first started?
It's definitely more expansive because I have a team of people working with me, which is great because there's things I always wanted to do. But the most difficult part about it is, there's only a small window where you can do it. You could work on the football book, and then you basically have from February on free agency, and we come out right on usually June 1st. So you got to make sure all the draft stuff's in there. We do more extensive draft coverage, more extensive IDP stuff than anybody. Like, nobody does the niche stuff better than us. Like I said, that's why I think people love us too, because we're good for the lunatics as much as the first time players. And that's hard to find. But for me, it's being able to add in other writers, being able to add in other voices that I have great respect for, giving them a platform too. We're an indie publication. We always have been. And I love that. Like, we've never had a major backing behind it ever. It's literally the little engine that could, which was ironically my favorite book as a kid.
There you go.
There you go, right? Something seeped into this bald head of mine. But that's the thing. Like, we do all the previews, so we get everybody caught up team by team of what the offseason looked like, the additions, the subtractions, what do we think the offense is going to look like. And I think that being able to cover, everything from high stakes NFFC stuff to best ball to everything in between is really great, because I think that, again, you're a big football person. How many different kind of things are you going to be doing this year, right? I mean, Scott Fishbowl alone covers like 12 different leagues in one kind of format.
I'm pretty sure almost every single one of my leagues is completely different. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to be catering to. And I think that what we lose in the industry right now, what happens is everybody's got their takes, everybody's got their rankings, and that's all great. And a lot of people have some really great informed opinions, but you need more. Otherwise, you can't really separate from the herd. And it's so hard, like I said, to separate from the group, because the group is collectively much smarter and more prepared just by accident. So now you really got to step your game up to a different level.
Yes. Yes. I mean, for real, like the IDP thing, I know a lot of people feel like their stuff gets ignored. Their stuff isn't nobody's giving me information. So it's really cool to see that you guys have a mix of
150 IDPs
things.
ranked, and we have enormous amount of profiles in there for IDP too, which is crazy.
That's
We're
awesome.
the only one doing that.
There you go. So yeah, there's a little bit of everything in there for everybody. And yeah, it's a great get, and to get it in the mail, and God, that feeling is so great, even though you
it
ordered
looks cool. It's black and it's shiny. It looks cool. Like I always love that. Like I remember like in the grocery stores back in the day, like when you'd see the first magazines come out, you'd be like, oh, you get really excited about it. But the nice thing that I'm able to do too is do the updates for people. Because we live in this technological age. So, I'm able to update the book. I'm able to make sure that we get, I update the RPV stuff too throughout the year. So if you subscribe to the RPV cheat sheets, they're going to, every month you get them for free after that. And in July and August, whenever I tweak something, if there's an injury, if there's a bit of news that's really worth it, something that really makes sense to move, then I'm giving people something on top of it that they can, have that's tangible that they can use going into their drafts. And that's also great because you start to connect with your readers more and you connect with them. And that's a cool thing. You start to see the same people year over year who are coming back, and that's a good feeling. And then you see new people for the first time, and that's equally exciting.
When you decided to do the book, what was the process to get it started? How did you figure out what you were going to do? Because it's kind of a new frontier.
It's evolved on its own. What I tried to do, and I always tell this to my writers too, because they'll say, well, what do you want me to do? And I say, write the profile you would want to read. Write the, and I always say, and this goes back to the shows too. When I first started doing radio, I remember we were struggling a little bit, and I think we were trying to do the show that we thought the network wanted to hear. And then I think a couple weeks into it, I looked at my partner, I was like, this is dumb. Let's do us. If we do us, people are going to love it. And we did, and we started to, and people really started to listen, and then it changed. And I think it's the same thing with, I think people smell authenticity. They know if you're full of crap or if you're not. Like they know it right away.
Yeah.
And I think with, the book, it's always been, well, what would I want told to me about this player? How would I want the strategies mapped out? What would be helpful to me to prepare for the season, for my drafts, and then carry it over into the season? Because that's the other thing too. We try to prepare people for in season, like we do DFS stuff, we do gambling stuff in there. We do so much, that you, like I said, it's like the Lord of the Rings, which is that one book to rule them all. That's what we're trying to do. and I think we're starting to succeed at that. And every year I think we've done the best job we've done. And then every year I think the next one's better. And I'm always like, okay, that's great. Now what can you do? And I think you have to kind of keep challenging yourself every year. It's like, what can we do better? What didn't we cover last year that we should? That's why we started last couple of years. I got one of the guys who's won NFFC last couple of years to do that chapter. Like, I don't want some analyst who doesn't know crap about it. I want somebody who's been there, done it, won $500,000. Like,
right.
I want that guy telling me what to do and why he's had success over the years. That's how it works. So it's that evolution of constantly saying, what else can we do? How can we help people? How is the game changing? How do we change with it? And how do we challenge ourselves every year? And I think that's where it's come from. And I'm just so lucky because the people that every year when they come back to work for me, it's great because they're like, yeah, let's go. And they're all so excited about it, which is humbling and awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I'm my own person.
You are your own person, Kacey. Don't let anyone take it away from you.
I'm my own person. Well, the homie Nate Hamilton was on, and he had brought up, being a part of it and everything. And that's what kind of got my wheels turning. Like, hey, I need to have you on here to talk about it. So really good that he helped get in my brain.
I see all my friends come on. And Kacey never asked me to come on the show. I don't understand what I do.
I know. There's only so much I can do. I only have so much time in my life.
Oh, please. I understand. You believe me, I understand.
So what were your expectations going into it when you put the book out in the first place?
Zero. I had zero expectations, which is good, I guess. And I always say this too to people, if you just finish something, you're 90% ahead of everybody else. Everybody has good ideas. Everybody, there's a lot of people have good ideas and a lot of people have talent, but they don't have the ability to finish something. Completion is a skill. I'm trying to teach my daughters this too. I'm like, finish what you start. You have a good idea. Great. See it through to the end. Finish it, because if you finish, you're 90% ahead of everyone else. And all I wanted to do was just finish it, get it up there and say, there it is. And then it was successful. I said, great. And it was on a small scale, but I thought, I don't know, maybe it'll sell 50 copies. Like I was like, woohoo, like
Yeah,
whatever.
right.
And it, it wasn't like life changing money, but it was like, hey, this is vacation money. It started off, and then it was, and now 10 years later, it's become like at one point your sole source of your major source of income, money, and that's stunning. And it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of back end stuff that has to go with it,
Mm-hmm.
but the process is fun, and when you work with the right people, it's fun. And I work with the best people who are so passionate about it and have great work ethic. And it's a challenge, like I said, in that time frame to get everything done in a
Mm-hmm.
short window of time, because you really can't get too far ahead, because the draft does impact a lot of stuff, and it impacts a lot of players and teams and how they're going to run things. And so basically you kind of have to write it from the draft or right around there. You can get
Mm-hmm.
ahead on like Tom Brady, but you can't get ahead on a lot of other guys, when you're writing for
Yeah.
it. So you kind of have to wait to see where the chips all fall, and then you kind of got to go crazy for a couple weeks, and then it comes out, and it's a wild ride, but it's fun.
How stressful is it during those last couple of weeks
Slightly
leading up to it?
less. It's way less stressful now with this amazing team of people than it was when I
Yeah.
was doing it by myself and staying up till 3 in the morning and doing all these crazy things while taking care of two little kids. Much less stressful now,
Much less stressful now.
but again, you have your stressful days.
Yeah.
You definitely have your stressful days, but they are few and far between, luckily,
Mm-hmm.
because you learn to get organized,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn how to put things in their place, and you know how to carve out the time of the deadlines and when you're going to get what and how you're going to put it all together. And that's, and then there's that 1 or 2 long days of assembling the book
Yeah.
where you're in your little hole for a few days, but eventually it all gets done.
What was something that you had to like really train yourself to do when you were putting that out? Like kind of like do something, maybe even do it differently than you thought you would need to.
I don't know about train myself, but I was having a conversation with Tags, who's also a writer,
Mm-hmm.
not just fantasy. And I asked him, I said, do you ever like, you're like working and you're in it and you're writing and writing and writing, and then like you decide, I'm gonna go clean out my closet. Like I just have these weird
Yeah.
things where I need this weird break where I have to like,
Yeah.
like, or clean the house, or you have to like, I'm gonna go trim those hedges. I can't stand looking out the window. Like I don't know why. Like you find, so that's it's just fighting those instincts sometimes. Do I go like run away from it sometimes? But then you have to step away sometimes and come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. So I think there's like a balance there. But luckily there's, knock on wood, not too many of the challenges in that regard anymore.
Well, speaking of Tags being a writer, what kind of writing did you do prior to writing articles and putting out the book, or was there no writing in your background?
No, there was writing in my background, script writing, screenwriting,
Script writing.
and a little bit of playwriting too.
Yeah.
But I was much more on the performance end of things. But my mom, those moms, they always get you, like, you're a very good writer. You should write someday. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to write. I don't want to, and who'd have thought? But yeah, I think it was always something I knew I had a good feel for.
Mm-hmm.
But then the funny part was when, I kind of stepped away from acting, it's you lose that creativity a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about writing is you have those, it's all in your time frame. Acting, so many things have to all fall in place for you to get that job and all that stuff. But writing is just you and the page and your thoughts. And I think that's what's nice, is it's there for you at all times, which is very unique compared to other things. It's more like an instrument. Like, well, the piano's there for you if you're a piano player. The saxophone's there for your saxophone player. Guitar, it's all there for you. The voice is there if you're a singer. But when you're an actor, it's hard. Like you need other people. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're just doing monologues by yourself. And there's plenty of that in my past too. But I think that's the nice thing about writing, is although there's solitude in it, it's something you can control and you can do on your own time, and you can do it whenever you want.
Putting together a team to do something like that, I
The
know
Avengers.
can be, yeah. I'm sure it's a kind of a time consuming process at first, because you have to pick out like exactly who's going to fit. But what is that process like or especially like when you first started, how did you go about finding people to help you out with that?
Well, I make them, it's like a combine. I had Nate Hamilton do a bunch of, he did a bunch of push-ups, and then I had Debro, jump up and like hit the thing. The 40-yard time for Bogman wasn't great, but I hired him anyway. But yeah, they're people that I've worked with in one capacity or another. And then I said, hey, and I just asked, I was like, would you like to contribute next year? And And inevitably, everybody goes, yeah, and they all seem very excited about it. So I'm very picky about who I brought in. And then I've really tried over the last couple of years to expand that base a little bit and bring in more female writers, which I've been able to do the last couple of years. And, like I only had a smaller nucleus of people, but, I think it's important that we open up the voices in the industry, because it's been a very male, white dominant industry for a very long time. And football in particular is loved by such a larger mass of people.
Right.
And it's so great to see so many more female influences, so many more voices doing podcasts and doing TV stuff, and so many more voices of color and people of color doing. And it's about time they're getting those opportunities. And some of them are, way more famous than me, but generally speaking, it's you could feel that wave coming, and I think it's important, and I think it's great that you're seeing more of it. And it's something that I'm trying to also make sure that I'm fostering that in my small little world as much as I can as well.
And with this wave and everything, like, how important has Twitter been to the fantasy football industry?
It's been very important for fantasy football. It has a lot more pluses than minuses. I think you have to be careful.
Yeah.
I think that, it's very easy to get caught up in negativity. Yes. It's very easy for people also to lose their credibility. And I think people don't kind of think about that enough. And I could see that, like, the person I am at 28 or 27 is not necessarily the person I am at 40, right?
Right.
So, I'm sure, and I'm sure, you learn a little bit more just discipline just in life about, like,
oh yeah,
nobody really cares if I say this or not. Like, it's like, just nobody cares. But you know what? I don't begrudge anybody having their own niche carved out. And there's people who are very successful on Twitter who also have great analysis and do great work. And then there's people who are on Twitter and just give takes all day and don't really back up with really concrete work, or, it's more of a performance art than the craft of analyzing and entertaining. And I like the craft of analyzing and entertaining, so I stay in my lane. And I think that your Twitter followers sometimes can be reflective of that. Like some people follow people on Twitter just to troll them. And I told people, I was like, like the more Twitter followers you have, it's not always great.
Right.
But I would say mostly my people kind of get it. Like they're cool about stuff. Like I don't, like I said, very lucky, but they kind of, you follow me, you kind of get the vibe. I'm here to put work out, answer your questions. I'm here to care more about your fantasy team than mine. And that's also something I feel like can be a detriment. I think that there's a bit of, in that Twitter sphere, people who care a little bit more about their opinions and being right and wrong than helping other people. Which I think at the end of the day, your job is there to help other people and share in their success, because that's your role as an analyst. I hate the word expert. I like analyst. You're an analyst, you're an information giver, you're a performer to a certain extent. So they'll listen to you because the show's funny. They'll listen to you because the information's good. But at the end of the day, my job is to get people better at this and have fun and do it in a good way. And I think there's sometimes that people care more about their ego and their right and wrongs and their takes on players than they care about, like, that. And I think that sucks sometimes, for whatever that's worth.
Totally. I totally see it. And sometimes I'll see it come across and I'll be like, oh, because it'll be like somebody that I've interacted with before or something.
And it doesn't make them bad people.
No, it doesn't.
It's just their style. And it's not always a style that I care for personally. But that doesn't mean that, who cares if I care for it? Like, if it's working for them and they're enjoying themselves in the community, that's fine. But and sometimes people evolve off of that into other better versions of it. So it's Twitter's a weird thing. Social media can be a weird thing, but more often than not in this community, it's been awesome. I will say, for the most part, I think more often than not, it's a really cool place to be a part of.
And I want to make this kind of a time capsule episode. So we'll go back and listen, and we'll see what our thoughts are on this later. But so I missed out on the Clubhouse wave that happened because I'm an Android. Okay, I was about to say.
Me too. Screw those Apple people.
Thank you.
If Apple's listening.
So I was gonna say, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a cool concept. But the back of my mind was like, who has time to sit there and listen? Like, I want to listen to a podcast. I don't think I have time to go do whatever they do at Clubhouse. But I did also think that Clubhouse may be something that kind of takes over at some point, but then I've heard lately maybe not. So do you think that
I don't know. I didn't do it either. And I know the people who did it, it was so hot for like, it was like Zoolander. Oh, you're so hot for like, 2 or 3 minutes. And then after that, it's like nobody's on there anymore.
Yeah.
Like we have something at Fantasy Pros now. We have Discord, which is fun because like I do a daily baseball show every day, Dan Harris and myself, and then we do the football shows every day.
Yeah.
And inside of there's communities of people, and they talk and they listen to the show, and they're the ones watching the live stream of the baseball show. And then we have a fun contest where we all give a home run call for the night, and we're going to do the same thing in football too. We give a running back and a wide receiver score a touchdown. We're going to try to do that. But it's crazy because it is like a community, and people know each other and start to talk, and they're talking without us, and then we'll do the AMAs, and it's got a feature where they can actually kind of be brought up and chat with us, like right there.
Cool.
Which I think that kind of version might be the better version, where it's a little bit more accessible, but it's also controlled a little bit more too, where you have to be part of the group in order to come in there, which is good. There will continue to be these other kind of things, and I think interacting with the people is fun. I think that's great. I think that's what it's all about. And some people don't like that. Some people just want to be in their little cave and do their little stats and their articles and hide there. And that's okay too. But I do think the interactive version is the way to go.
And the community of people that not only play fantasy football, but write and, podcasts and do all the different forms of media. How crazy is it to think that a group of people that like fantasy football could grow something like this?
Well, they've grown the NFL. I mean, the NFL has grown because of fantasy football and wagering. That's why the NFL is where it is. Besides the fact that the product's really good and it's really well presented. They've done a phenomenal job over the years of evolving the presentation. I mean, the draft was not the draft back in 1987. It was in the the Grand Hilton somewhere in New York City, like in a back room, and they rent out the ballroom, and you have the draft, and the guys are smoking cigarettes and all the real phones and stuff like that, or like the helmet phones. Like that was the draft. Now look at it. Like they understand that it's a show. And I think that's what's so great about football is they get that it's like sports entertainment. It's kind of more like that. So yeah, I think that's the difference. That's where we are. I think that's where it's going to continue to go too, and as it grows. But that's my 2 cents on that.
And with social media, you get athletes that are also on social media, and you have people that get upset when something happens in real life that affects their fantasy football.
Oh, that's the worst when they add an athlete. Like that athlete is working their butt off trying to be good, and they're making millions of dollars anyway. Why do they care about you on Twitter? They're not. And I don't know why any athlete ever kind of stoops to that level when somebody like, you cost me a fantasy championship. It's like, okay, like, grow up. Or like somebody, that's just people trying to make a name for themselves. Like that's all that is. Or just people yelling at the sky. That stuff is stupid. Don't add an athlete unless you're going to say something positive, because they already know they're feeling the negative already. They don't need you to compound the negative for them. How'd you like me to come to your work and yell and stuff at you and troll you? Believe me, I could do it. I've got some spare time I could carve out. That'd be great. But that's, people never think like that. They just, take out their frustrations and do stupid things. But I also don't like when the analyst community does it. Like,
I was going to...
That's the worst. You got to be above that.
Yeah.
You had a strong feeling, did research on a player that failed. Don't at them. You can talk about it, but don't at them on Twitter. Who cares? What loser stuff, man.
I was going to ask you, like, does that ever happen with you? Do people ever?
I've never added an at one time as a joke after having this conversation. I did it as a joke.
Yeah.
And people then commented about it. And I was like, I'm kidding. It's a joke. I just did it as a bit. But that's the whole point. It's like, people, Aaron Rodgers doesn't care. I could at Aaron Rodgers every day of my life. I've got enough feelings about him. But I'm not going to do that. He's just a complicated fella. We just have to accept that.
He's a complicated. I love that. I love
I just
that.
changed my Twitter handle to that today because I can't get enough of the complicated fella thing.
Delightful. Well, here's just a little sidetrack with a story about athletes on Twitter, though I bring this up when I can, but Jonathan Stewart searches his name. But anyway, back to you don't have to add anybody. Anyway, back to the podcast being about you and not my
and some guys are really fragile too. They are.
Jonathan.
And
well,
they
him in a few different ways, but
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll stop. So I want to hear more. Since we were talking earlier, you were talking about how you have like a new gig with Fantasy Pros and
Mm-hmm.
everything, and a lot of us probably don't know exactly what all of that entails. So, what exactly are you doing with Fantasy Pros?
Well, I'm hosting every single baseball show, every single football show. So for the
Okay.
podcasts, for the video versions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing profiles for them and all of that too. But I'm also in the creative end of like how we're doing things, how we're going to skew these shows, how we create the shows. I
Mm-hmm.
actually produce all the baseball podcasts too. So like I do the production end of stuff. So and I've learned that over the years. It wasn't something I was trained. It was something that I learned to do. Like you've learned to do it too, right?
Yeah.
Like again, brave new world,
Yeah.
Audacity, all these programs, beautiful stuff. You're like, well, I can do
Yeah.
this. I just exactly. So yeah, so that a lot of it has to do with shaping the creative ideas of what we're gonna do because it's already wildly successful, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was bringing a little bit more of the entertainment value to it, bringing a little bit more of the creativity to it, bringing it to a new level, not a different level, not a higher level, just a new level that we can say, well, yeah, maybe we could do this better, or maybe we try this instead, or all right, well, this works. Well, okay, well, I'm going to put my spin on it. And they've been so great because they really, Dan Harris, who brought me in, and Blaine and that whole group, they really they wanted my input, which is great because I had a lot of ideas having been around in
Mm-hmm.
so many different places in television and in radio and in podcasts and all that stuff for so many years and done so many shows. I know what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also willing to try certain things. And I have like this never ending like feel for ideas and wanting to do certain things and try certain things, which is always great at a big place because sometimes they're stagnant and well, where do we take this next thing? And they've been so wonderful about allowing that to happen. And I think so far, and it's only been 4 months, but I think we've made a pretty good foothold in things in terms of evolving and taking that next step of stuff because it's got some Yates and tags are terrific. Lauren Carpenter has been joining us doing a bunch of stuff, and she works on Black Book this year for the first time, and I think that's great too because we got a great team of people. We have a great infrastructure. It's a great site. Now it's just a matter of what can we do that's gonna make people never miss a show? What are we gonna do,
Mm-hmm.
people? What are we gonna do that we're gonna be the go-to over anybody else? How do we get to one in everything? And I think that's a cool challenge, and I'm up for that. Let's go. Let's do it.
Go.
Let's go.
Well, for the people that are listening to this right now, because I know you're listening, go listen to the podcast over with Fantasy Pros as well, because I'm sure you already are, but if not, add them to your subscriptions because the podcast is great. The podcast, you can feel the kind of like you were talking about earlier, talking about having co-hosts and how you have to feed off of each other and things like that. You could feel like how you guys mesh well.
And you know what? And it's funny because Yates is somebody that I didn't know until recently,
Mm-hmm.
really in the last year or two,
Mm-hmm.
and Tags is somebody I've known for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes time for anybody to all kind of start to feel each other's stops and where you're
Right.
and really kind of know where you could push the limits and where you probably shouldn't.
Yeah, right.
But that's the whole thing. It's like, can we make a show that is really fantastically well informed and really smart and at the same time really stupid and fun? Like, can we do that? Can we meld those worlds together so that everybody goes, I can't wait to hear what they're going to say next about this player, and I can't wait they're going to hear to say next about each other. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to create that world. That's what I want to live in.
And you guys are kind of like rock stars in a way, right? Because you have
I
fans.
guess. I mean,
Like,
I
how
don't
does that
know.
feel to have a group of people? I mean, you have the fan base that buys the book. You have the fan base that listens to the podcast. Like, how does it
Awesome.
feel to know that you have like a group of people who are looking forward to the stuff you're putting
I
out?
feel like this is the community. Like, I don't know, like, fans. I never thought of it that way, really. Like Dave Grohl has fans. I'm one of them. But like, I just feel like it's my people. It's my community. Like, and every year we can grow it, and that's great. And and it's so cool to be able to know that you're doing something on a platform that's reaching so many people. Because I've done, I started a podcast where we had 100 people listening. And it was like, oh my God, 100 people. Now there's hundreds of thousands of people listening.
Crazy.
And that is a very, and with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that for some people, sometimes you get that rocket ship and they don't quite understand what they're dealing with. And it's a lot to take in, and they don't fare well with it. And then sometimes you get things at the right time in your life where you get that opportunity and you know exactly what to do with it. And that's how I kind of feel with this. So I kind of feel like it came at the right time where I knew exactly what to do and, more importantly, what not to do, because you want to represent the company well. I am not the head of Fantasy Pros, but for better or worse, I'm the face of it in a lot of ways. And I have to kind of understand that, and it's very important that you kind of get that, because people see you, hear you. They don't hear the president of the company. You're like, I do. I know those guys, right? But it's different. So you got to represent the brand like you would represent yourself. And I think, with a lot of respect for the people who listen, even the negative people, like, you take it with a grain of salt and stuff, and I always wonder, like, how bad is someone's life that they have nothing but, like, I'm going to take time out on this YouTube video to make a negative, I feel more sad about that person.
It's like pulling teeth to get people to write positive reviews, even though that they love listening to whatever. I know that based on listening to other podcasts and my own, that it's kind of hard at the beginning to get people, because you do have to take time out. Saying it's better, for me to hear from somebody who's tweeting at me that they enjoy the show than it is.
Well, that's why we read them on the show. Like on the baseball show, once a month, we read the best, funny, like, good reviews of the show. So we're encouraging the positivity. Like, we'll read your review. Like, we want you to be part of the show. I love it when, like, we do the live streams and we get the questions and things like that, and we, and they have give and take with the people. That's all great. Like, I think people also smell fear in you. So they know if they can get to you about something, they're gonna get, oh, he's soft, like, come on, like, what more can be done to me at this point in my life? I don't care, I just wanted, and every now and then there's a grain of truth in the negative comment where you have to look back and go, maybe they're onto something there. But like every actor, you start to read your reviews too much, you start to change your performance, and then you're no good to anybody, because then you're in your head. You want to be out there, you want to go do the show, and then you want to be done and say, what just happened? And if you could say that, then it was a good show.
If you're having a day where it's just not the best day in the world, you're, mad, you're upset or whatever, there's something happened, and then you have to go on, and do your job, be on a podcast and do all that. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like, how do you get your mindset into that so that you're not coming off the way that you feel?
It's a great question. That's actually a really good question that I've never been asked before. Most of the time, more often than not, it's the solace place. Like, it's the place where everything else disappears for 2 hours. Or an hour or whatever it is.
Right.
And you're talking to somebody that you really like to talk to about something you're really passionate about. So if anything, it's more therapy or therapeutic than anything. There's days where you're burned out. Sure. I mean, there's days where I'll do 9-10 hours of talking. And that sounds like, oh, big deal. But some days, especially because, you'll understand, you've got your reads, you've got your commercial things you got to do, you got the time of things. There's a lot of preparation to look effortless when you're doing these things, and people don't grasp that. They just see you doing it and, oh, it's easy. Well, yes, it's easy, but you don't see all the back work that goes into it. And I think that's something that kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. But there's days sometimes where it's challenging, but there's never a day where and maybe this is why I'm still doing it, and there's never a day where I go, ugh, I really don't want to talk football today. Like, it never happens. There's never a day where I'm just like, oh, if I have to do one more DFS show, like, no, like, I want to do it, especially when I learned right away to work with my friends, like the people I like, the people that got the best out of me. And I was very lucky because early on, I worked with a lot of people who were much better than I was. So that was a challenge because I had to immediately get to their level. And that's how you get better. It's like any other. It's like, they always say, well, you play tennis with somebody better than you. Well, that's the truth. But I think that's the difference for me is when you have those hard times and those hard days, and believe me, I have them like everybody else. The shows are the solace. The shows are like the island. And I think I'm very lucky because most people get their stress from work, and then not to say that work can't be stressful, because it can be, especially in certain places. But for the most part, especially when you control your own brand, like
Mm-hmm.
Black Book or control your own shows to a certain extent, like my Black Book podcast I did for years and years with Bogman and Welsh. That's joy. That's, I can leave everything behind for an hour and do this, and inevitably I'm in a better place afterwards. That's gold, and I understand most people work is not that for them. It's the opposite, and that's where I come in, and that's where I
Mm-hmm.
know I'm not saving lives. I know I'm not changing the world, but I'm making people's days better sometimes, and that's cool. People turn on that show, they get their fantasy football talk, they have some laughs, they say that guy's a goof, and then they come back tomorrow and they're, I don't know, they're able to go, they sit at their desk and listen, or they're out, wherever they are, and they're listening to the podcast because they've had a rough day, or they're on their walk with their dog or something like that. Or they're having trouble in their marriage. Like, I can tell you the craziest stories. People I know, there was a guy who used to listen to my shows. I remember on Saturday nights when I was telling you about that crappy time slot I had.
Yeah.
There was a guy who messaged me on Twitter. He's like, I'm in the hospital. And people can't come up and visit me on Saturday nights after a certain time. And Saturday nights so alone. And I always listen to your show. So I was like his companion every Saturday night. I felt like he had a buddy who was talking sports with him. It's stories like that where you're like, okay, I'm not saving lives, but you know what? Maybe I'm doing something that's more important than I realize.
And that's the best. You make my
Yeah.
work day. I listen to podcasts while I'm at work. Like, I can multitask to that to that. Well,
To that
yes,
extent.
yeah. I can multitask. Yeah, sure. But no, but like listening to podcasts and stuff while you're doing something that maybe isn't the most enjoyable, like you said, is something. So it's really awesome that you can do that and be able to put a smile on somebody's face. When you first started podcasting and to where you are now, but when you first started out podcasting, was there something that you were doing that maybe you were like overthinking, that once you got the hang of it, you were like, oh,
Yeah, I told you. I think early on there was definitely that idea of what's the perception, like what should we be doing, and you start to do bits that are kind of done by other people. Like, you got to break away. And I'll give you a perfect example. Like, at a certain point, I said to like I said, my first co-host on air on Sirius, who happened to be one of my best friends in real life, I said, why don't we do something fun? Like, let's have a song bet, right? And this was years ago, and I know other people have done it since, but I don't remember anybody doing it before, where like we would play a head-to-head DFS matchup, right? We would do our lineups and all this stuff, and the loser had to come back the following week and sing a song of the other person's choosing, like, and we picked like whatever we could possibly do to embarrass each other. Like, I'm Every Woman, I Touch Myself by the Divinals, Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams, like Power Ballad, anything that we could possibly do to be like, I'm gonna make you sing this on national satellite radio, and I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna love it, I'm gonna enjoy it. And then like our producer at the time, he had this amazing like Barry White voice, and we used to do this bit called Javon Makes It Sound Sexy, when we would give him like just directions for putting like furniture together, and he would read it on the air, and we'd play sexy music. It's that kind of stuff. We were just like, let's just have fun, let's just do this. Like, nobody's listening, and if they are, they're not going to tune away because they're going to say, what are those guys going to do next? And in between, you have passionate, amazing, informed sports conversations, and it's hard to find that balance. But man, early on, like I said, that every time someone asked me, like, you have any advice, or I always try to come on shows, because I remember when I was starting, anytime anybody would come on me, to come on my shows, I was so excited, like, oh my goodness, like, so great, like, that they would take the time to do it. I always try my best to do that for people, and they asked, they said, what should I do? Like, do the show that you want to do, not the show you think other people want to hear, because nobody cares about that show.
Do you think that it's important that if like you want to get comfortable behind the microphone, that if somebody invites you to come on their show, that if you are a fan of the product, that you decide, I'll go on your show, or get the reps in?
You can't do enough. You can't do enough reps to get good. I mean, it's like anything else. You don't get better by doing one show a week. You don't. You get better by doing 3 shows a day. And that's more what I've done in the last 5-6 years. Out of necessity too. I mean, just because I also needed to do that, because as I said before, it's very difficult to find one place that's going to pay you enough to survive. So you have to do 3 shows for this place and 2 shows for this place, and schedule all that. And the beauty of that is, well, I will do this show here, but I want to do it with that person, because I like working with them, and I know they're going to be prepared. I'm going to be prepared, and we're going to have good chemistry. And it's going to be a good time, and it's not going to be like work. It's going to be fun. That's the key. And when you start to figure out that piece of the puzzle, that's when things are really good.
If you were hosting a show and you had a guest on, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, just to help out other people who may want to, I'm not saying this has happened, but
I'm not saying you're the bad guest, Joe,
no,
but if you had a terrible
you're a
guest
great,
and
you're
it's
a great
blood from a
guest.
stone, Joe, what
You're
would
a
you
great
do?
guest. I'm just saying, I have not encountered this yet, but
Okay.
it's bound to happen, I'm sure. How would you go about kind of like getting through the show at least if there was something like
Well,
that?
that's a good one too. You get also good people sometimes that are a little nervous or stiff sometimes.
Yes.
And then what happens is, as the show goes on, it's my job to make them comfortable.
Right.
I always like when the show becomes a conversation.
Exactly.
And I think the conversation part, that's when a show's good, where it's not me asking a question and then them answering a question constantly. It's talking about something. And I bring up a topic and I'll bring it up in a very pointed way. And I also encourage the people who are hosts, watch the hosts that you think are good. Like,
for sure.
whether it's a news host or a sportscast, like there's certain hosts out there, they're so good at what, like Rich Eisen's the best there is, right? Nobody sets up a discussion like Rich Eisen. He also gets his opinion in there too. And it's a good one usually. And he's also very quick on his feet and very fun. Like he's the gold standard, right? But there's even some really good news hosts when you watch them interview somebody. Watch the people who are good interviewers. Listen to how they frame a question and how they bring up a conversation and how they pivot when somebody says something. People think that hosting is about talking. It's the opposite. It's actually about listening. Because if you're really listening, and this is where the acting stuff really came in for me personally, if you're really listening, you know exactly the next thing to ask or how they really feel about something because the way they said something. That's the difference. That's that like next notch kind of thing that I think that's when you start to get really good at this, is when you start to listen to the people, but you really hear the guest. And look, some people are duds. I'm not going to lie. My job is to get as much as I can and then know their limitations and then be done. And not go an hour with somebody who can't do an hour.
Right.
I'd rather go 20 minutes with somebody and have it be a good 20 minutes if that's all they can handle. Because some people aren't interesting enough to listen to for an hour. You know?
I never really took the time to really think about that, about being able to steer if as the host can, kind of controlling the way that the conversation flows. So
yeah, you're the driver. And it's funny because I started out as a number two.
Yeah.
I was in the analyst number two chair for the beginning of my, career. And then I got to a point where I was getting more and more chances as the one, and then solo hosting as the one. Like sometimes I'd be there by myself for 3 hours doing a show, and that's wild. You're not getting a lot of calls, believe me, on radio those nights. But you start to get the feel of it. And then the funny thing is, being a number two or like being a guest, it's almost like, well, I'm on vacation, as opposed to all the work that goes into the hosting part of it. Now, you understand, it's like all the preparation, the study about the person, the study about the thing you're going to talk about, the setting up of the bits, the crafting of the segments, but as somebody who likes the control of the wheel, I like it. I like the challenge of it. And then when you're doing live television, like I do every week, you got to be out at the commercial. There's hard outs. It's very different. It's not just like long form, whatever we want to do. I got to make sure I hit all these things, make sure all the graphics that I asked for can be used in the segment as I'm talking about them, go from piece to piece. And that is a great challenge too, doing the television side of stuff too, which is I love doing. Which is why I stuck around, and I've been doing it there for a couple of years now, and it's great.
What is your biggest passion out of all the different forms of media that you work with?
My biggest passion is my kids. Easy.
Your kids. You brought up that you have daughters. Is that the kids that you have? Just daughters?
Two daughters, 8 and 11.
Awesome. And how's being a girl dad?
Awesome. And I've been the stay-at-home girl dad throughout, and a single parent through more than half of it. So it's and always the person doing all that and doing all of this. So like the balance is tough, but that's my passion. But like outside of that and that real world stuff, it's films has always been a huge passion of mine. Like films have always been, that's why I got into acting in the first place, because I wanted to do great films, and then the great films kind of dried up. Like all those amazing like late 90s, independent filmmaking stuff that made like, oh my God, these are going to be like, it all kind of dissipated in the 2000s stuff. And I did a lot of theater and stuff like that too, but I still love good filmmaking, good acting, stuff like that. I get passionate about that. I love football. Like I love when you sit and get those standalone games too, and you can really watch what's going on and see the inner workings. And then this is what a good analyst does too, is, they watch the games too. It's not just all numbers. There's so many other things going on, and you could see, in certain players, what the confidence level, the lack of preparation, all, you see it. Not everything shows up in the box score and the numbers and the deep stats. Right. Not everything's there. There's a combination of those things. So you got to put the eye test too. And I love that. My kids are finally getting into that too. Very passionate about professional wrestling too. I came from a world where, while I was doing this career, I was also working part-time as a professional fight choreographer and instructor for 10 years.
Wow.
So every weapon I've trained in, I have taught for years and years, and trained actors to work on many, many shows, and did a lot of work on a lot of plays and sets and things like that over my lifetime. I was very passionate about that too. And wrestling was that kind of an offshoot, which is so funny because some of the shows I host now on TV are with current and former professional wrestlers doing football shows, which is hilarious. Like,
that's awesome.
It's like a weird, it's like, what is my life? Whoa. It's so bizarre. And then I pass these passions down to my kids. Like they're really last year they picked all the games last year. They were very into football. Cool. They think Kyler Murray is small and cute and they love him and they can't get enough. And they're starting to get into that now. They're big wrestling fans. They're, that's very cool. You want to experience all these things, but we're big Marvel dorks. Like we watch all the movies over and over again and stuff like that. We got our tickets for Black Widow already, so we're ready to go. But yeah, I have many passions, music, films and stuff like that. I think that's good. The more interesting you are, and the more interesting you become, I think, to other people, especially when you have to do stuff like this, because it also lets you connect with these guests. Because if you have more interest, chances are you might land on one of theirs, and then you can bring them out of their shell if they're not the best guest in the world. You can kind of hit on something and and they get real comfortable with you. Oh, you're a comic book dork? Oh, great. I'm going to ask you this question. Or you're a big music nerd? Great. Let's talk about, this album. That's cool. That, being able to do that, I think is good and helpful and let you connect with people.
It really is. And bringing up the family thing, I know that I love talking about my family. I know other people love talking about their family. And
some here, don't. So there's people in my family that it's some people you want to put through a wall. That's just that's family.
Is. But when you have two awesome daughters, those are definitely the ones you want to talk about. So that's really cool. So and speaking of music too, you had brought up Scott Fishbowl earlier, and what division are you in for the Scott?
I don't even know yet.
You don't know yet?
Everyone's getting their invites. I'm like, Scott, I didn't get my invite. He's like, yeah, I'm just sending them out to all the masses, whatever, first. And I'm like, okay. He's doing them in batches, I guess. So I didn't have any preferences.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I want to do is make Fish's life harder.
Don't make it really hard. I don't know. It might make it even easier. I don't know.
I mean, maybe it does. I don't know. But I'm just like, put me anywhere, dude. I don't care. Whatever. Right. And it's always, that's also, I feel the first demarcation now in the fantasy football season is Scott Fishbowl. Okay, football's coming. Here we go. Let's have Scott Fishbowl. And that's very fun. But yeah, I haven't got my invite. I see everyone with their screenshots. I know I'm in it.
I've been in every year. I have it right here.
What, my assignment? Where am I?
Yes. Okay. So as of now, I know that Ryan posted that this could subject to change, but it has you and the Foo Fighters division. Wow. You know what? That might have been the thing. That might have been my only. Drafting second. Oh, all right. Now you got a lot to think about.
Who else is in my division? Let's see.
Okay, let's see who else we have.
Let's have some fun, Casey. Who's in there? Can you know who's in there? Let me say.
Let's see.
Do I know any of these people?
Do we know any of these people? Sorry if let's see. We have. I'm having a really hard time.
That's okay. Don't worry.
It's super small. Is there anybody? There's Jake Trowbridge from Ball Blast. He writes over there.
I know who that is.
Yeah. We've got Jason Thomas from Dynasty Happy Hour.
Very cool.
I'm looking. I've got.
They all better be ready for me. I'm coming for them because I was pissed last year. I had a great draft. And Saquon Barkley got hurt. I had Josh Allen in the 5th round, and I was still hyper competitive.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted Josh Allen last year. He throws too many picks. I'm like, is anybody else watching what this kid's doing? He's gonna figure it out. And when he does, look out. And they gave him to me for free. I love that draft so much last year, and what this is like. You come back, you're like, oh, this is a good one. This really went my way. And inevitably, that's always the one that just sticks you in the back. You're like, oh, nothing works out. I I had Julio, I had Calvin Ridley, I had Matt Ryan, I had Saquon, and I had Josh Allen. And I was like, let's go. Like, this is going to be, I'm going to run this bad boy. Nope, not the case. Did not happen. Competitive, but
you go out of that draft feeling so excited. I went Dak and then Russell Wilson. So, I lost Dak pretty early, and then Russell Wilson fell off.
In my attempt to defend the belt behind me as Flex League Super Flex champion. Last year I had Dak and Joe Mixon. So need I say more? Those first two picks sunk me. Again, hyper competitive, missed the playoffs on a tiebreaker still, but it wasn't meant to be. But that first month of Dak, wasn't it glorious? Like
it was. Oh my gosh. I was like, I'm going to win the Scott.
I was just running around I was victory lapping there. Like, look at me. And I think Dak might be QB1 this year when all is said and done. I do. Well, I think he's got a real shot at it.
As a Cowboys fan, I am hoping. So
there you go. I'm not a Cowboys fan, and I'm hoping because I said it in the book. So let's see.
There you go. So for the people who don't know you very well, do you have a team? Who's your team?
I'm a Patriots fan. And
okay.
Before
Tom Brady, you did talk about that. You did talk about how you got set up. Yes.
I did. I was a Bills fan as a very small kid because I didn't want, being from New York, I was like, I don't want to root for some team from New Jersey. The Giants and the Jets play in Jersey. Heck with that. Screw that. And the Bills had Thurman Thomas and Jim Kelly, and this was so great. And then we moved out to Jersey, and then they lost the Super Bowl to the Giants, and that was kind of tough. But I wore my starter jacket the next day with the cool flap on it, whatever. And then the next year they lost to the Washington football team, formerly Redskins, and that was tough. And then they lost to the Cowboys, and then the Cowboys. And I was like, where are all these Cowboy fans in New Jersey all of a sudden? I don't understand this. Where'd they all come from? And after that, I realized something, and this is a true story. 13 years old. I realized football is not about talent. Yeah, it's good to have talent. You got to have the right coach and the right game plan and the right system. And I literally, as a 13-year-old kid, this is how I thought, which I guess is why I do what I do now. But I said, I'm going to go now. I can't do this. You got to move on. Marv Levy is getting outcoached by these guys every time. He's not prepared. They're handed him his lunch every time. And at the time, Bill Parcells was like the guy, and he went to New England, so that's where I went, and I've been there ever since. So I went through the Drew Bledsoe years with Ben Coates and Chris Slade and all those dudes, and I lost a Super Bowl there too, and I thought it was me. It's me. I'm a freaking jinx. 5 Super Bowl losses. Enough of this. I can't handle this. I'm getting a complex. And then Mo Lewis hit Drew Bledsoe, and Tom Brady came in, and life got really good for a very long time.
Lucky.
Yeah. Oh, 100% spoiled. Oh, man. Spoiled, rotten, and it's been great. In fact, my kids are like, when the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, they're like, I don't understand. Like, they don't.
Yeah, that is.
It's so weird to grow up like that. Yeah. Like, you don't understand what this is like. This doesn't happen. Okay? It doesn't happen.
I was in elementary school when the Cowboys were winning Super Bowls. So,
you couldn't quite enjoy it to that level. It's been a while.
It's been a while. And being from Dallas area, like seeing Cowboys. Right. So like, I didn't just jump on, like I've been there. So, So before we go, I just, it's been a great conversation with you. I've learned a lot. Likewise. And I'm sure that everybody
asked some really good questions, actually. Some questions I've never been asked before. So that's really cool.
Well, I appreciate that. Before we go, can you go ahead and just tell everybody where they can find your stuff one more time and what you got going on?
Well, you can follow me on the Twitter machine at Pisapia17. I'm there. And of course, you can get the Fantasy Football Black Book 2021 on Amazon right now. It'll be on iTunes or Apple, whatever the hell it's called today. In a couple weeks working on that. It always takes longer. That's why I'm an Android person like you, because I hate Apple. They drive me crazy every year. But you can also, of course, listen to the Fantasy Pros podcast. So the football podcast, obviously, and our baseball show we do every day leading off, which is hysterical. And Dan Harris is a genius and hilarious. It's the two of us talking crap for a half hour every morning live. And it's in a podcast version too. But we got some great guests coming on the football show. We got Marcus Grant coming on tomorrow. We got Jamie Eisenberg coming on next week. We've got Kate Majuk, who contributed to the Black Book, coming on after that. It's going to be great. We have some great people lined up, and I'm excited because it's so great that we're finally now it's like getting to the draft season, and then at a certain point we're getting, okay, I'm sick of draft season. Now it's time for real football, like the stages, but I'm in the stage of, oh, cool, let's talk about draft prep now. Like, I'm super excited for that. So I appreciate you having me on and keeping me as long as you did to have a conversation. It was fun.
Well, thank you. And the the Black Book is definitely something you need to go out and purchase if you don't already have. So, all right, everybody, we will see you again next week, and stay rad.